A good Tavach, a Freilich Tavach. Tonight is the 24th of Kislev, and it is the anniversary of the time when our grandparents were looking for the cruse of oil. We know that after the Maccabees came back to the temple, they needed to find oil to light in the menorah, and all the oil had been contaminated by the Greeks. And they were searching and searching for oil, and on the 24th of Kislev, miraculously, they found one cruse of oil. In a similar way, it says every year, on this day, Hashem empowers each of us to look beneath the surface and to find the cruse of oil, to find the purity within ourselves, within our souls. And just like in the story of Hanukkah, that cruse of oil, they were able to light a menorah for 8 days, and the 8 represents the supernatural, the infinite. So too, in the day before Hanukkah, we're able to connect to that part of ourselves, the pure cruse of oil, which is like the number 8, which is infinite, pure faith, pure belief, without any limitations. Just before I began this Zoom, I went to Menachem someone, and they shared with me a story which I think underscores this idea. Fortunately, their mother passed away, and he said that his mother had visited him in New York a year and a half ago, and his niece was looking to find a shidduch, trying to find her soulmate. So his mother came to New York, and she said, "I want to go to the ohel of the Rebbe. I want to ask the Rebbe for a blessing." Very pure-hearted person, very sincere person. So she went to the ohel, and the very next day, her daughter met her soulmate who she got married to. She went to the ohel, and the very next day she was answered. This tells you the purity of spirit of the person asking for the blessing, and the response, the simplicity of the faith of a Jew in Hashem, as Baal Shem Tov taught, was a power to cross oceans. Baal Shem Tov said a Jew with a simple faith can cross an ocean with a handkerchief. On that note, I'm going to share with you a story of the Alter Rebbe and a story of the previous Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe had a certain follower of his who had visited many Hasidic Rebbes. In his youth, he was a student of the Shpola Zayda, famous grandfather of Shpola. And the Shpola Zayda taught him the following idea. He said, your doing good has to be commensurate with your turning away from evil. What he was referring to in Hasidic language was not just merely performing God's commandments and moving away and distancing ourselves from things which are not kosher. For the Shpola Zayda, doing good means to reveal in yourself your love for Hashem. Not just to show up, but to bring in the good energy of what you're doing. To bring happiness and love and good feeling in all the mitzvahs that God gives us. To bring an attraction and a good connection to Hashem with joy and happiness in a mitzvah. Like Rabbi Berditchev would kiss the esrog. He would kiss an esrog because of the sheer joy he had of doing the mitzvah. So the Shpola Zayda taught this young man that how much love are you meant to have? You're supposed to have as much love as the distance you have from the negative. As much distance you have from the negative, that's how much love you have to have the positive. That's what he taught them. Maybe this will help explain this idea. Mendel Futterfass once commented on chapter 4 in Tanya. In chapter 4 in Tanya, it says, the love for God is what motivates us to keep all of God's commandments. And our reverence for God is meant to instill in us a sense of distance from the negative commandments. So Mendel asked, if you love your father, you do what your father asks you to do. And you are also distant from what doesn't belong in your life. And if you fear your father, you also don't want to violate his will when he asks you to do something. So what does the Alter Rebbe mean when he says love is the source of the positive and fear is the source of the negative? It would seem that if you have love, you have it all. You have reverence, you have it all. So Mendel gave the following two examples. Mendel said, let's say it's Shabbos afternoon and it's sundown, and you haven't yet washed for Shalosh Seudos. You haven't yet had the third meal of Shabbos. And you want to, people are getting together, it's a festive meal, you want to be part of the holiness, but it's sundown. Well, there is an opinion which says that you shouldn't really eat after sundown. Even a few minutes afterwards, you shouldn't. The other opinion says you could still eat a little bit if it's only a few minutes after sundown. So Mendel said, if you're full of love for Hashem, so then you don't worry about it. The fact that it's a few minutes after sundown, you want to be part of that celebration. Mendel said, Hasidim are traveling to see their Rebbe, and it's almost sundown, it's almost Shabbos. They love to be in that environment, so they're more cautious of being there than they are of perhaps honoring the Shabbos by getting ready in advance for Shabbos and not coming a little too late to prepare for Shabbos. So obviously you can't violate the Torah's laws. The Torah's laws are absolute, but how you understand what Hashem is asking of you has a lot to do with the feelings you have in your heart. So the Shpoel Zayda told this man, you can't just decide to accept upon yourself every single mitzvah in the most beautiful way. You can't decide to copy the ways of the righteous. But you could go as far as distant as you are from evil. That's how much you could go towards performing a mitzvah with more beauty. In other words, the specific stringencies you want to accept upon yourselves in the Torah has to do with how distant you are from you. That's what the Shpoel Zayda says. So this man was educated in this way. The Shpoel Zayda, it's worth mentioning, the Shpoel Zayda, although we know of his great joy in performing mitzvahs, but his personal service of Hashem was with brokenness, with bitterness. Like, the Alter Rebbe once visited him, and Shpoel Zayda came down the stairs. The Shpoel Zayda said, "Why are you come up to see me? I'm just an old animal." He's always berated himself. Always was broken. That's always his way of serving God, with brokenness. It's with bitterness. So it's natural that his description of serving Hashem was, as you want to bring out love, well, it has to be according to how distant you are from you. So when he came to the Alter Rebbe said, what he told you is a path to Beis Shammai. There's an argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel about how to describe a bride to a groom. According to Beis Shammai, you are just meant to, Beis Shammai says, you're not supposed to insult the bride, but you're not supposed to exaggerate either. Tell the groom that the bride is exactly the way she is. But Beis Hillel says, no, it doesn't matter what the bride's beauty is. You always should say the bride is beautiful. You'd say the bride is kal nava chasuda. Doesn't matter if she's blind and she's limping. Always say how beautiful she is. Beis Shammai says, no, you describe the bride the way the bride is. So in a similar way, the Alter Rebbe said, we, the Jewish people, are called the bride of Hashem. The Hebrew word for bride is related to the word for yearning. Kala comes from the word klois hanefesh. So a Jew is called someone who yearns for Hashem. What is the way of serving Hashem? So the Shpoel Zayda taught like Beis Shammai. Shpoel Zayda said you have to only go according to the level you're on. But the Alter Rebbe said no. The Alter Rebbe said, Kal Nova Chasuda, you have to follow the path of Beis Hillel and not limit yourself. Not limit yourself. In other words, the Alter Rebbe had a different path in serving Hashem than Shpoel Zayda. The Alter Rebbe's path was reveal your soul, find your crucible oil. And Alter Rebbe said, the light in the Torah will bring you to the right place. Don't worry so much about if you're on that level, not on that level. Bring out your crucible oil, discover your soul, discover who you really are, and automatically you'll get there. The light in the Torah itself will bring you to the right place. That's what Alter Rebbe taught. So on that note, I want to share with you a fascinating story about a Rebbe of Premishlan that the previous Rebbe writes about in his diary. It's I want to share with you as best I can to paraphrase from the previous Rebbe's original diary, because there's so much context that gives us so much insight into many other things that, okay, no further ado. The previous Rebbe, it's 1907, it's the 8th day of Kislev, And the previous Rebbe was with his father in Würzburg. The Rebbe Rashab, as other Hasidic Rebbes, would often travel to various health spas because of their health conditions. And the previous Rebbe was accompanying his father in Würzburg. And the previous Rebbe said that it was the night of the 9th of Kislev and the anniversary of the passing of the Mittler Rebbe. And the Chazan was a very elderly Jew named Zev Gedalia, who was from Premishlan. And the Rebbe Rashab said Kaddish for the Mittler Rebbe after Elaine. This Rebbe Zev Gedalia shared that for 50 or 60 years before, 50, 60 years before they met, he was living in Premishlan, and there was a very great Torah scholar, very God-fearing, and his name was Aaron Shimon. And because he was informed on by the government, he had to run away from his hometown. And that's how he ended up in Premishlan. He was a chassid of the Mittler Rebbe. And later he was a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek, who was the successor of the Mittler Rebbe. So the Zal Gedalia said, one time, I came to the shul early morning, and I saw it was Aaron Shimon davening privately. And I was so excited by seeing the way he prayed that I became one of his students. But he said, unfortunately, I only was able to retain from his teachings very, very little. Although this Aaron Shimon put a lot into me, he really tried to help me, but he couldn't reach me. I couldn't absorb his teachings. However, he gave me a taste in prayer. A taste in prayer gave me. And thank God, from then until now, 50, 60 years ago, I saw this Aaron Shimon, and I have a taste in prayer. For a year, he said, I made an effort to pray with the same siddur that Aaron Shimon prayed with, the siddur of the Arizal, and the siddur of those students who were with Aaron Shimon. Rabbi Aaron Shimon said this, Zev Gedalia, Rabbi Aaron Shimon would pray the Psalms. Sometimes he would pray them with a sense of bitterness, with a voice of supplication, sometimes with great joy. Rabbi Aaron Shimon had a lot of pain in his life. He was weak, and besides the pain that he had in his body, besides the issues he had from traveling all the time, he had also personal health issues. Yet he was always the positive spirit. And when he prayed and when he studied Torah, he sounded like a healthy, whole person. So the previous Rebbe, before continuing on telling us what this Rebbe Zev Gedalia shared, he described who this Zev Gedalia. He says this Zev Gedalia, and the reason I want to share the story tonight is because the previous Rebbe talks about his simplicity and his purity, which echoes what I was trying to share before about the pure crucible oil inside of us. So Rebbe Zev Gedalia, the previous Rebbe said, he is not in the category of those Torah scholars. The Talmud says that Torah scholar, the older he gets, the more his mind is settled. So Rebbe Zev Gedalia was not in that category. He wasn't that caliber of Torah scholar that the older he gets, the more settled his mind was. He studied in a cheder, he studied in a school for little children. And when he was 9 years old, his father took him to work with him in the forest. And he only was able to study for a few hours a day, and the rest of the day he would review his learning in the field. And that's how he continued his lifestyle to the age of 15, and he became an expert in reciting the Chumash and the Psalms, reciting the Bible and the Psalms. When he was 20 years old, he already got married, and he moved from the village to the city, and Hashem helped him, and he had a very good livelihood. So Rabbi Zev Gedalia said, when I was living in the village, I'll get up really early. 3 o'clock in the morning, I'll get up. I'll spend 2 hours in my house, and then I will go to shul. When I came to shul, I found this man standing and praying with such sweetness that I never heard in my life. And I don't have the words to describe the sweetness. The previous Rebbe said, I believe this simple villager, he doesn't have the words to describe the sweetness, the joy of the soul that one of the Chassidim in the Mittler Rebbe had. But nevertheless, the previous Rebbe said, although he couldn't concretize what he saw, he didn't have the words, didn't have wasn't sophisticated enough, in other words, to appreciate what he saw. Nevertheless, the previous episode said, I was so excited to see the wondrous feeling this simple person had, that that as he's speaking, we could feel that picture that he saw in his teacher, Rabbi Shimon. And it's in front of his eyes. And the sweet voice of this man's prayers is ringing in his ears. And he just doesn't have the words to describe it, but he still has that image in front of his eyes. The previous episode said, when I look at the character of this elderly man of Zev Gedalia, I see the beauty of the previous generations and their sincerity. The previous episode said that this man made such an impression on me that I shared with my father, Rebbe Rashab, what this man had said. Rebbe Rashab, as long as we were walking the previous episode, was talking more and more about, telling me more and more stories about the simplicity and the value of sincerity of simple people. Okay, the next morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, we dive in together. And Rabbi Zev Gedalia again is the chasna. Davening continues until 9:30, and the Rebbe Rashab says Kaddish. After davening, Rabbi Zev Gedalia shares with me stories that this man knew firsthand. Rabbi Zev Gedalia said, I know that I'm a very simple person. I know that I'm unsophisticated. And I cannot give an opinion about various tzaddikim and various rebbes. And therefore, he said, I made a rule for myself. Any Torah scholar, any great tzaddik that I will meet, I will try to learn from them. Because for sure I can learn something. So he said that one time I was on Shabbos by one of the rebbes that visited Premishlan. They said about this rebbe that he was 100 years old. He was completely all white, and his white clothing and the splendor of his face cannot be described. The whole house was full, and everyone was waiting for him to come out so that they could set up the table for this elderly tzaddik to lead the festivities. Among the people that came that night, said Rabbi Zev Gedalia, were some great tzaddikim, that each of these tzaddikim who were visiting, each of them had thousands of students themselves, thousands of chassidim themselves, but they all came to see this elderly rebbe who was 100 years old in Premishlan. The news came that the rebbe is coming, and everyone turned their eyes to the door. From there, the rebbe would come out. He said to Zev Gedalia, I was standing by one of the windows, and when I saw the beauty of the splendor of this tzaddik's face and his dress, and the two elderly chassidim, two elderly followers of his walking with him, I was filled with fear and dread. For 2 hours, the tzaddik sat at the table, and he spoke, but Zev Gedalia said, I couldn't understand what he was saying. I couldn't hear what he was saying. And when they repeated it afterwards, what he said, I couldn't understand it. There's only one thing that the tzaddik said that Friday night, and that was about Shalom Aleichem. L'chaim, l'chaim. The tzaddik said like this. They were in Shalom Aleichem, there are 4 parts. The first part, we say, greetings unto you, angels, right? Then we say, come, angels. That's the second stanza. The third stanza is, bless us, angels. And then the fourth part is, believe in peace, angels. Parenthetically, it's interesting, the change in the language of the Shalom Aleichem. We greet the angels. We call the angels Malachei Hasharis, angels of service. And the next 3 stanzas, we call them angels of peace. And everyone's explained that the original Shalom Aleichem, the original greetings to the angels, actually means to send the angels that accompany us during the week away. The angels during the week are called Malachei Hasharis, angels of service. They help us. They help us get the job done. Therefore, they're called angels of service. However, on Shabbos, the Jew is already in a higher level, and the angels that are coming on Shabbos are more about connecting us to Hashem, which is the idea of peace. Peace isn't just that you're at peace, that you're not fighting with anybody. Peace is about the convergence of a Jew bonding with Hashem. And therefore, the angels that we invite to us in the second stanza, come angels of peace, are different than the angels we say shalom. First we say shalom, goodbye to the angels of the week, and then we invite boyachem l'shalom, we invite the angels of peace. This tzaddik concluded the second stanza. Come angels of peace. And he was about to recite the third stanza, bless us angels of peace, and he stopped and he said the following thing. He said that when I was a child, this guy's now 100 years old. When I was a child, my grandfather, the Rebbe, sent one of his students to bring me to his synagogue. I'm a little child, and this 100-year-old man is saying about his grandfather. His grandfather sent for him, and his grandfather, one of his students, brought him to the synagogue where his grandfather was. It was Thursday night, and I was learning Chumash with Rashi at that time. As a child, I was already learning Chumash, already learning Chumash, Rashi's commentary. And I was an expert at that time in the book of Bereshit, the first book of the Torah, the book of Genesis. I already knew that well. When I came to my grandfather, I found my grandfather was learning Chumash with Rashi, like me. And my grandfather asked me, have I learned the Torah portion of the week? And I said, no. I said, Rebbe, I haven't yet learned the whole, my teacher hasn't yet taught me the whole Torah portion. I've studied part of it, but we haven't learned the whole Torah portion yet. Parenthetically, there is a custom to recite the entire Torah portion twice, the Aramaic translation, every week. And the Rabbi said that the way to do this is to do this on Friday afternoon, then on Shabbos morning to recite the seventh portion with the Haftorah, and the Thursday night before Shabbos to recite the first section with the Aramaic translation. First section twice, the Aramaic translation. That's a custom we do on Friday night. Now, the Rebbe mentioned the Hayom Yom, that's a custom of the Chabad Rebbe's. However, someone wrote a letter to the Rebbe asking the Rebbe, how are we supposed to do it? And the Rebbe said, the way to do it is the same way that is described at the Rebbe's do, which is, again, the first section on Thursday night, then the rest of it, then repeat again Friday afternoon, and then repeat again Shabbos morning, the seventh portion. Okay. Anyway, so it's Thursday night. And this tzaddik is saying that my grandfather wanted to speak to me, and he's telling me, he's asking me if I finished. I said, no, my teacher didn't teach it to me yet. So do you know, my grandfather said to me, that a child, before he was born, he's taught the entire Torah. An angel teaches a child while he's still in his mother's stomach the entire Torah. And I heard, said this tzaddik, from the Baal Shem Tov, that on the Thursday night before Shabbos, the angel teaches the child the Chumash of the week with Rashi. And someone says that tzaddik to his grandson, someone who God has blessed with a good memory, when he comes an adult and he studies on Thursday night the Chumash with Rashi, he remembers the taste that he had when he was a child, when he was a baby, when the angel taught him Torah. That's what the tzaddik, the grandfather, is telling his grandson, who is also a tzaddik, that the angel teaches you Torah when you're in mother's stomach, and if you remember, if you're good, some people have good memory, they can remember when they're studying Chumash Thursday night, as the angel teaches the child the Torah portion of the week on Thursday night, and when you become an adult, when you again study the Torah portion of the week on Thursday night, so if you have a good memory, you can remember how the angel taught it to you. When this tzaddik, when my grandfather finished teaching, sharing with me, he's teaching the Baal Shem Tov, he put his hands on my head and he blessed me. And from that day on, every Thursday night, I learned the Torah portion of the week with Rashi. And every time that I study, he said, I remember the great difference between the way I'm studying now and the way I studied when I was in Gan Eden, when I was in heaven, when I was in my mother's stomach before I was born. And I have a lot of pain. When I think about the difference. He didn't say if he actually remembers how it was in heaven, just remembers, I remember how different it is, study Torah now versus studying Torah in Gan Eden. It sounds like that he was aware of. And I have great pain. He said, when I was a child and I had this pain, it didn't bother me so much. However, now that I'm older, he says, the pain that I have makes me weak, and therefore he turns to the angels. This tzaddik is now sharing this again he's sharing this memory of his grandfather between Boachem L'Sholom, come angels of peace, and bless me with peace. He says, when I remember on Thursday night, I'm not studying Torah the same way as I was in Gan Eden. That makes me very weak, and therefore I turn to you, angels of Shabbos, sweet angels, bless me in peace, angels of peace. So the previous Rebbe said, in the eyes of this Reb Zev Gedalia, there was a whole world in his eyes. And when he shared that story about that older Rebbe, he didn't know the guy's name. He didn't know his teachings. But that event that he saw was standing in its full splendor in front of his eyes. Previous Rebbe continues, that is the nature of simple people. They know and they don't know. They hear and they don't understand. They remember and they don't remember. But deep down in their soul, it is engraved in their memory forever, that when decades go by, the impression that happened is that impression that event has, it returns, and all the good inside the person is revealed. I asked this the previous episode. I asked this man, if Rabbi Zev Gedalia, can you tell me about your teacher, this Chassid Mittler Rebbe, Rabbi Aaron Shimon? Because today was his yard site. Today is the Mittler Rebbe's yard site. What are you saying? Said Rabbi Zev Gedalia. He stood up with great excitement, and his face started to shake, and his face turned white like cement. The previous Rebbe said, today is the yard site of the Rebbe of my teacher of Aaron Shimon, and I had a merit to be the chazan on this day. And he covered his face with his hands and he cried and cried and cried. The previous Rebbe said, I was so confused, I didn't know what to do. And so that's the previous Rebbe goes on and describing this man, and that's what I want to share with you tonight. Tonight is, again, the time we're supposed to discover the cruse of pure oil inside of us, just like the previous Rebbe said about simple Jews. Simple Jews, as Baal Shem Tov said, in the simplicity of a simple Jew, there's an expression of simplicity of Hashem's essence. So tonight we're empowered by Hashem to discover that purity and simplicity we have inside of ourselves, that purity, that simplicity should allow us to prepare for Hanukkah, the right pure spirit, and to be able to go into Hanukkah, to light the candles of the menorah for 8 days. 8 again represents the infinite. 8 represents the power of sacrifice, the power of devotion to Hashem. So today's day, Hashem helps us discover this power, and then this illuminates us throughout the holiday of Hanukkah. May we be illuminated by the pure cruse of oil within ourselves, which is the spark of Mashiach within us. May we see Mashiach Tzedkeinu, the Kar of Mamish, a good Tevach, a Freilich Havach, a Freilich Hanukkah.